And hello, people of the internet, whoever you happen to be in this particular instance. Today, we are going to be starting a bit of like a new lecture series of sorts on this channel. So this is sort of my first one of these. I usually do them in voiceover. Now, I have a whiteboard. I know. Fascinating. So, today we're going to be looking at these main concepts. Objectivity and subjectivity, which I said in the wrong order. Then beauty, art, and the aesthetic. Now, these are very interesting concepts to discuss, especially with regards to their relation to objectivity and subjectivity. Now, I've actually done something similar to this before, like a similar, it was a more of a scripted video. In this sense, we're actually going to be just looking at this in more purely theoretical sense, rather than trying to make a fun video. This isn't a fun video. Okay, so the central ideas that you need to understand when you're approaching the idea of what is beauty, art, and the aesthetic is to understand these two concepts first. You need to understand subjectivity and objectivity. They are both very, very important concepts to understand in this particular sense. So, what are these two terms? They're actually very, very simple. Now, it would be a bit of an oversimplification to just say subjectivity equals opinions and objectivity equals facts. Now, that is a very easy way to look at it, and it can help a lot when you need to remember what it is quickly. To be like, okay, what is subject? It's opinions. It's opinions. Anything that is subjective is not something that is factually correct. It is something that is thought up in people's heads. It's something that is subject to change. It's something that can be malleable, that can change around a lot, right? So think about your thoughts on what you think are the best versions of movies, or what is your favorite book. That is subjective. There is no such thing as an objectively good book, or objectively good movie, objectively good video game. You cannot say that because objective means factual. And if I can disagree with you about something, it's not objective. If I drop something and it falls, that indicates the theory of gravity, which is objective, right? If I drop a thing, it falls. It's a fact. Now, facts are actually a bit of a complicated little issue there. Maybe one day I'll go into the problems of objectivity and why it's actually not really what we think it is. But for today, we're not going to be doing that. This is going to be a much more simple, sort of a chill look at these kind of things. So just remember, objectivity, facts. Subjectivity, opinions, thoughts, beliefs. Cannot prove it. This is kind of cannot prove. This is can prove. However, you could still study things that are subjective. I mean, that's what, say, analysis of literature is. If you're analyzing literature, you're doing it from a subjective perspective. And you could do an objective perspective on, say, literature. Say if I wanted to look at the language use in a book, and I was going to go into a book and I was going to say, how many times does a certain word occur? That is a much more objective analysis, because if I say that the word however occurs 57 times in this book, you can't then say, I don't agree with you, because it's objective. That is how many there are. It is quantifiable. That's also why when it comes to the ideas of qualitative and quantitative data, which is a whole other thing, but if you know those terms, this one, qualitative. This one, quantitative. See, if something's subjective, it's qualitative, it means it cannot be put into statistics. It cannot be numerically valued. Objective can. It is quantitative, generally. Okay, so these two concepts, these relate very, very specifically to these three things, to beauty, art, and the aesthetic. Now, all of these are subjective, inherently. They are not objective things. However, this is where you come into a bit of a problem, because some people try to claim that these things can be. They try to say, this friend right over here is these things. That is when they try and claim that there's such a thing, for instance, as objective beauty. So remember, beauty, we're going to go down the list. So we're going to start on beauty. Beauty is what they say, in the eye of the beholder, which means that beauty is something that you see, I see, we all see, but differently, right? Beauty is a thing that I have my thoughts on, you have your thoughts on, that guy has their thoughts on, that person has their thoughts on. Everybody looks at it differently. What you think is beautiful, I might not think is beautiful. If we were to look at, the easiest way to look at this is to look at people, right? What is considered to be beautiful in people changes based on the society in which you live, right? So societal standards of beauty shift and alter. A good example of this would be the lotus flower feet from ancient China. So most people know about this thing, or at least most people I've interacted with, that there was this custom in sort of ancient Chinese societies that tiny feet were very, very appealing on women. So tiny feet. But the thing is, tiny feet aren't natural. Most human beings don't have tiny feet. So they would actually bind the feet. And what would happen when you bound the feet, they would actually break, which is great. So actually some people died because of this thing, and they would break so they could fit into these tiny little like children's shoes, pretty much. That was what was seen as beautiful. Now, most people today, I just, have a feeling, most people today, if you showed them a mangled foot where it's like deformed because of a purposeful mutilation of the foot, most people would say, that's not very pretty. That's a bit ugly, actually. I think it's a little bit ugly. But back then, it was considered to be beautiful. So what is considered to be beautiful is determined by the society in which you live. If your society says that's beautiful, then your society says that's beautiful. You can disagree personally. You could say, I don't really like mangled feet, but society as a whole says it is. But of course, that's subject to change. Like that is a practice that was outlawed in sort of modern China. That was outlawed, that lotus flower feet, because it's extremely dangerous. These people would be walking around on broken feet for like the entirety of their lives. They'd get things like gangrene and they would die. So, personally, I don't think that's particularly beautiful, but it was considered to be beautiful at the time. So, when you look at a lot of societal standards of what we consider to be beauty, it is often whatever society decides is beautiful at the time. So if you look at westernized societies, right? So I'm from South Africa. South Africa is a more westernized country, even though it is an African country. In South Africa, much like a lot of Western countries, you will often see that beauty is actually racist. It's racist, it's fatphobic, it is usually also things like, say, transphobic. There are the ideals of beauty for men and for women are very different, right? A woman is supposed to be slender with big breasts and big hips, although that depends. Some people don't really like big hips, which immediately, if you're going to say, oh, well, beautiful means big breasts, and somebody else says, actually, personally, prefer small breasts, then that is a subjective response. So anybody who claims that, say, big breasts or big hips or big thighs or a shorter stature or a certain facial construction, if anybody says any of those things are what is beautiful, like objectively beautiful, like it's factual, it's beautiful, they're wrong, they're lying. Well, they're not necessarily lying, they might not realize that what they're saying is a mistruth, but it is, it's not true. What is beauty is determined by society and the individual. It is subjective, it is not objective. Same with, say, men, right? What is considered to be beautiful for the cisgender male would usually be tall, right? They're usually, that when you think of a hot guy, you usually think tall, chiseled facial structures. Probably stubble, but not necessarily. There could be stubble, there might not be. It could be clean shaven. Beards in the modern era are becoming considered to be more sexy, like a big beard. But usually you would have like the stubble, right? You would have someone muscular, but not too muscular, right? You don't want somebody who's like a massive 7-foot tall beast. That's not considered to be hot. That's considered to be impressive, but not necessarily sexy. So beauty in men would usually be a more muscular but athletic build, right? Not too muscular, tall but also not too tall, chiseled facial structures but maybe not too pointed, high cheekbones, obviously not much body fat, so obviously I don't really count as one of the most beautiful human beings that ever existed. But of course, you might disagree. You might say, actually, I like guys who are chubby. I like guys who are ridiculously tall. I like guys who are whatever. Your idea of what beauty is different to what somebody else's idea of beauty is, which means it's not objective, right? I did a video in which I demonstrated how ridiculous the idea of objective beauty is, and you can check that out. It is linked in the description. It will be called, what was that video called? Feelings Don't Care About Your Facts, because I was making fun of Ben Shapiro. So, beauty, not objective, cannot be objective. As soon as somebody says it is objective, this is beautiful, not true. I think it is beautiful, right? That is why I say, for instance, here's an example from my own life. I remember seeing a picture from my fiance. She took a picture when she was in Stuttgart in Germany. She went to like I've forgotten the name of the thing. When you're a student and you go somewhere to another country, a foreign exchange student. She did that thing in Germany once, and it was snowing. Beautiful. I've never seen snow because I'm from South Africa. We don't have snow unless you go up to some tall mountain. So I've never seen snow up close. And she took a picture of the landscape of Stuttgart. So the roofs of all these buildings covered in snow, and it looked absolutely beautiful. It was gorgeous. And then I showed that picture to my grandfather-in-law, and he said it's not beautiful because it's buildings. It's not nature. Now, I think that both buildings and nature can be beautiful. Like, nature, not all of nature is beautiful. I don't think deserts are particularly beautiful. You might disagree. You might think that deserts are gorgeous and jungles suck. But we have different opinions about what is beautiful in nature. And also some of us, so when you look at buildings, you might say, oh, that kind of building, beautiful. That kind of building. You see, so it can change, it can alter. What you think is beautiful is not what somebody else thinks is beautiful. And so you need to look at it from that perspective when you're looking at beauty and understanding its relation to subjectivity. Now let's move on from beauty and go into art. Art is another one of those things that is extremely subjective. How many times have you encountered people who say, that's not art? When they look at something like those Rothko paintings, which is basically, if you don't know, those like the paintings where it's like one color or two colors, and it's just a stripe. I don't personally care for it. But I'm not going to say that's not art, because there are certainly people who do see it as art. I don't personally care for it. But art is another thing that's subjective. What you deem art, somebody else might not deem art. And also, of course, art doesn't mean good. You get bad art. You might not like art, but now what a lot of people do is they confuse beauty and art, or at least their perceptions of these two things. They will think of beauty and then art together, and they'll go, if it's beautiful, it is art. And if it is not beautiful, it is not art. So let's say somebody doesn't enjoy the movies of Adam Sandler, like myself. I don't like Adam Sandler movies. So somebody who's like that will say, it's not art. It's not art. It's terrible. It's bad. But then you're actually not saying it's not art. You're saying it's bad art. It can still be art. When a child draws something that you put on the fridge and pretend is good, it is still art. It's just not good art. And if you can hear a dog barking, it's because they saw something. Let's just try and ignore them and hopefully they stop barking. So, nope. Of course, they're going to keep barking. Let's ignore them. Okay, so, what is art changes based on what you think is art a lot of the time. But now, a lot of these things that are not good art, or at least not what you think is good art, that's another thing. Remember, if it's good or bad, that is subjective, not objective. You can say it's bad. You can say Adam Sandler movies are as bad as you want. You can say that you hate this kind of movie or you hate this kind of book. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you say is good or bad. Good or bad doesn't equal art. Good or bad equals beauty, or at least appreciation of something in that particular sense. Art shouldn't be as complicated, because what is art is kind of everything that is created with some kind of an aesthetic purpose, but that also becomes difficult. So defining art is really hard, because if I say something is art, you might disagree. A good example would be functional art. So I'm going to put a picture here of something by Carol Boyes. Now, Carol Boyes is was an artist, but she created what's called functional art. So it would be something like a spoon, or a bowl, or a plate, or a fork, or a vase, something like that. These are things that sure can be made to be pretty. But usually when you think of a spoon, you don't think spoon art. But it is art, but you use it as a spoon. So it is art, but it's also functional. So what is art in that particular sense can shift and change based on who you are and what you think personally about what is art. So it changes, it shifts, it alters, but kind of, this is why personally I actually like the term that a lot of people really hate nowadays, the term content. Content refers to kind of anything that's made by people on like social media. It could be books as well, it could be like books, it could be movies, it's all content. It causes less of an issue, I would say, than the word art, because art has an inherent value judgment attached to it. What is art? It has to be good, it has to be beautiful. But it's not true. For instance, you're not going to get many people who will genuinely say to you, the Mona Lisa is not art. Yet, I personally think the Mona Lisa is pretty much the most boring painting I've ever seen. And I don't like that it gets so much attention. But it does. It's an extremely famous, important piece of art because of what it manages to inspire in so many other people, and because of the techniques that went into its creation. It is a masterpiece. But I don't like it. I think it's very boring because I don't care for the subject matter. I don't really like portraits. But that doesn't mean that it's not art, it just means it's not for me. So art alters, changes based on personal preferences, but that is a thing that is worth looking at when trying to understand your own. Like, try to think to yourself, what do you think is good art? What do you think is bad art? And then try to think to yourself, the things I see as bad, they are still art, they're just not for me. Now also, sometimes they might just be bad. You do get things that are just bad, and then you get things that are not for you, if you look at certain things that are just badly made, right? And this is where you get into also subjective territory. So let's say something like the 50 Shades of Grey books. Now, I've never actually read them, but I've seen excerpts from them. And I know, as a writer and a teacher and things, they're badly written. They're not well written in terms of what you would consider to be grammatically well laid out prose. They're not well written. However, the people who like those books, they like those books. They don't care about the language use, even though I might say it's not well written. But that's still subjective. What is well written, what is badly written, falls into what is called prescriptivist and descriptivist ideas about language. When you're saying that there's a correct way to write or to speak or whatever, you're making a value judgment. It's not actually factual. It's not objective, it's actually subjective. Say, for instance, young people using slang. There's nothing incorrect about what they're saying because language is constantly evolving and changing. We don't speak like Shakespeare anymore, right? In English. Obviously, Germans never spoke like Shakespeare. But now that is something to keep in mind. It shifts, it changes. What society deems to be or not to be art alters over time. And also, just because you don't like a thing doesn't mean it's not art. So let's move on to the last one, the aesthetic. Aesthetic is also one of those terms that kind of means beautiful. It's nice. Aesthetic has now kind of been used by some people who don't seem to know its actual definition. I don't know if people still use it as if they'll refer to something as aesthetic, which isn't what the word means. But once again, that is where you get into that idea of language usage. So if I'm going to say, that's not what aesthetic means, you're not allowed to use it like that, that is going into prescriptivist territory where I'm trying to claim that there is a correct way to speak, which there isn't. If you want to redefine a term in your own terms, use the word term twice there, there's nothing wrong with that. But when we usually, in academic terms, think of the word aesthetic, it means something that is generally pleasing, something that is enjoyable, something that is well constructed. But what is and is not a good aesthetic shifts and changes based on personal preferences. It's the same stuff as these. All of these have the same issues. They are all subjective. They are all often trying to pursue some kind of an objectivity. A good example of this when it comes to art, the aesthetic, what have you, when you look at reviews of movies or books or whatever, reviews are inherently subjective, but it's an attempt to be objective, especially when it has a score at the end, because a score, a number, numerical value, this is a 5-star movie. It's trying to pretend that it's objective. It's trying to say, this movie is objectively good, and so it gets 5 stars. But of course, that's your opinion. I might think that movie sucks. I might hate that movie. It might be Top Gun. So, it's not objective, yet we pretend it's objective. When you see a movie and you Google it, and it says, okay, I've got a 7.5 out of 10, oh, that's could be a bit iffy. You don't know that. There are movies that are on Google, like on Metacritic, it'll say, oh, it's got like a 5.3 out of 10. I'm like, that's one of my favorite movies ever. It's an amazing movie. I don't agree with people disliking it, but that is subjective. I disagree with you. I disagree with the internet. That's fine. I don't have to. You don't have to. The internet doesn't have to agree with me. People don't have to agree with me. I don't have to agree with people. Subjectivity. What I enjoy, I enjoy. What you enjoy, you enjoy. That is what these concepts are. And so if you are in an academic situation, say for instance you're writing an essay about beauty, art, and the aesthetic, you really should be talking about subjectivity and objectivity. And you need to look at examples to understand them, and to explain what people think is beautiful, what people think is art, what people think is aesthetic, and why they are and are not right and wrong. Because it changes, it morphs, and it alters over time, and it's very interesting. It's very interesting, and it's something that's also confusing and difficult for a lot of people. People want to believe that certain books, certain movies are good because I like them. But just because you like a thing doesn't mean it's good. It also doesn't mean it's bad if you think it's bad. You can argue till you're blue in the face, but if someone likes a movie, they're going to like a movie. Or if they hate a movie, they're going to hate a movie. You might persuade some people along the way if you are good at arguing, but, like for instance, I can watch a movie like Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane is a fantastic film. I think in many ways it's an objectively good movie, how I see it. But it's not one of my favorite movies. I'm like, it's a fantastic movie. It's very well made. I can understand why it has all the hype and tension, and why it's often considered to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest movie of all time. But I don't personally agree. I'm like, I like it. It was good. It was good. But I don't think it's amazing. I don't think it's genius. I think it's very well made. And so that's where you get into that area. And so, I think that's it. I think that we are done for now with this particular discussion. If you enjoyed this, do the usual internet things like comment, subscribe, share, talk about how brilliant it is. And if you have any broadly literary concepts that you want explored or explained to you in hopefully an accessible and easy to understand way, then please mention in the comments. I'll see about getting to it if I have the time and if I know the area, if I know the topic. And so check out that stuff. And also, if you want to in any way support this kind of work, you can always go down to the description and check out the other stuff I've made, such as you could always check out one of the books I've written, which, That could be fun. Maybe you'll think they're beautiful and artistic, beautiful works of majesty, or you'll think they suck. If you love them, 5 stars. Be objective about this, please. And if you hate it, you're obviously wrong, so don't review it. Just bye. Have a good rest of your day. Have a great day, week, month ahead. And bye-bye. And don't be mean to me. Please. I can't handle it. Not again. Please.